see how this is working. Okay, you guys can hear me fine. You have that. And I have this watch. 11 minutes and 37 seconds. That was my mile time today. And I don't know when was the last time I ran a mile, but I can tell you that today I ran a mile. And it felt great. I dribbled around a soccer ball after, and I realized that, wow, this feels great. But see, I'm doing it differently now than I was before because now I'm doing it because I'm happy to do it. Whereas before, it was like an appointment. And it was one of those appointments where it was like, I didn't necessarily have full jurisdiction over the fact that it was at a particular date and time. And now realizing, like, oh, I can facilitate when things are happening throughout the day. I realized, like, wow, there's so much value in my energy, in my dog's at the door. And what I learned is that if there's a certain version of life that exists where money is not an object, but instead rather an energy, then how do people get to learn about that? How do people get to appreciate in their knowledge with that movement? And I could get into the whole money can be considered something called currency, and currency is another word for currents, which has to do with the flow and movements. But right now I'm going to talk about detachment from money. And so a lot of people, they'll say that they want to, and this is something that I just thought of. I was like, if people essentially go out of their way to say, hey, I'm gonna, let's just say, pay off someone's house. Paying off someone's house would be a means to get to the end of the notion that the person would feel liberated or free based off of the mental magnitude that is a mortgage. And what I realized is that you could be happy to be paying a mortgage. Now, in what position would someone be happy paying a mortgage? Well, hypothetically, if someone built their dream house in America where they have mortgages, then someone would hypothetically either be happy to spend the money. They wouldn't sit there saying, like, if someone built a custom house, it's because they're happy to be involved with the journey that involves the details of, oh, I want these finishes and my shower to look like that, my garage to be this big, right? And that's a completely different mindset because there's a completely different set of people who are essentially suffering at the notion that they're so attached to money that it's guiding their lives in the ways that, in a very literal sense, cause them to suffer because they're suffocating. They're suffocating in the attachment, in the magnitude of what money means as a means for them to essentially travel from nation to nation seeking a better life when they think that the country itself would offer them a version of freedom that, I guess, in a very literal sense, they could give themselves, but in a very not so literal sense, they don't have access to because of either programming or false beliefs or anything of the sort. Because one thing I do also see and understand is that there's happy people everywhere. You just, in a sense, have to choose to see that in life. And just in the same way that you have to choose to see that money is not necessarily the end all be all of all things. Because there's plenty of people with money, but they have so much money that what are they really doing with that? Then we get into this whole conversation about money in itself being the the temperature gauge of how good your life is going. And I could continue in getting into all of that, but I'm focusing on how I detach myself from money. So I was able to detach myself from money because I realized that intrinsic value, the intangible value of something, has a lot to do with the personal intention and the purpose of why something was made. So, for example, a lot of gifts that you receive have sentimental value for the respect that if the gift makes sense to you, it's because that person, it's because you make sense to that person. So, what that means is that if, let's just say you're an artist and you've been harping and harping about a particular, I don't know, easel or stand for your canvas, right? That the particular product is of a quality that it's like, yeah, I could actually use this forever and it'll go good in my little studio, yada yada, right? And if someone has the means to buy you that, then you're gonna be head over heels because of course you would hypothetically buy your own easel or paint or stand, except for the fact that you also know that you could buy multiple other easels and multiple other versions of paint with the money that was spent on that one particular thing. So when you realize the bare basics of value in the essence of, oh wow, you know what? Or like things that are free, for example. When someone offers you like a taste of something or a trial of something and it's like, oh, you know what, this guy's willing to let me have it. And if I want more of it, then I can ask this guy for it. And that's great and all. Because that's tapping in more to detachment than anything else because the detachment of how I got there was realizing that when a grandma or anyone that, let's just say that there is a chef at a restaurant and it's the chef, the person taking the orders, and the person cleaning the dishes. There's literally only maybe two people max touching a plate, maybe even one person. The energy in the food is objectively there, which is different than if, like for example, if there's two different in and outs on the same street, and one of them is made by robots, and then the other one is made by someone who has loved working at In and Out, that they worked there for 15 plus years. This is the interesting part about the world we live, and I'm going to break this down a little bit easier for you to understand. There's a lot of nuances to this, and we'll cover some of them. The first nuance is if you went to the robot In and Out and you got a robot made burger, well, it's going to be consistent and reliably consistent, and it's probably going to be convenient because it's going to come out quicker. And I would argue that a lot of people aren't going to notice the difference between that in a handmade burger. But see, the fascinating thing is that something can be said about the people who don't notice anything. Because if someone is void and detached from their essence of life, then they probably wouldn't notice. But then some people are going to be like, oh, this is just a mediocre in and out. But then some people are going to go to 15-year veteran and they're going to be like, this is the best burger I've ever had. But then the same people who just don't notice the void are going to potentially be like, oh, I actually like the one down the street a little bit more. And witnessing that in real time and being someone who's studied this, and to me it's fascinating because this has to do with the detachment of money in the sense that you can't pay somebody to put love into something. You can't pay somebody to listen to you. You can't pay somebody to have a conversation with you that makes sense to you. Because if that person can't have a conversation, like if you're having a conversation with someone and it's not a pleasurable experience, well, maybe in a very honest sense, just don't have the conversation with that person. And this is alluding to the detachment of money in the sense that you shouldn't use money as a means to get whatever it is you want. Money in itself is just money in itself. And if you were to use money as, let's just say money was a person, and I'm a person. So when I speak about myself, I'm also talking about money. If by definition I can choose to be happy right now, right? And if I go put my headphones on and I listen to music, there's a chance that I could potentially listen to a song that is a happy song. It's not that the song makes me happy. It's that I'm happy to listen to that song. Point blank period. Because I could listen to Beethoven. I could listen to Kid Rock. But I choose to listen to whatever I want to listen to because it suits my fancy. Because I resonate with that. And it feels good. It's because I also feel good. So it makes sense to me. So just in the same way that, for example, if my best way to garner my, where I'm going with this is like if a tool is best used, like if a like a garden hoe, would you use a garden hoe in the desert? I mean, maybe you would. Would you use a garden hoe in an all cement house? Would you use a garden hoe in the snow? I mean, maybe you would. But a garden hoe is best used in my backyard where there's soil and dirt. I don't know if I'd take a garden hoe into a basketball gym, right? So in that same sense, it's like if someone or something has a purpose, then acting on positive energy that is aligned with the purpose makes that person in themselves resonate with whatever good vibes is associated with their purpose. It's not that they're going and working at In and Out to get the wage so that they could pay their bills. It's that they really, really enjoy the fact that they get to cook the hamburger because they also know what it's like eating the hamburger when it's cooked right. Just in the same way that it's money that gets to be used properly in the essence that the money has a particular purpose. And if you in your mind are like, oh, you know what? I actually know where my dollar would best work. For example, the other day, I was like, man, pizza sounds really good right now. But like most people, a pizza's gonna last you maybe an hour. that I realized, like, you know what, if I go buy a loaf of bread and a couple avocados, and I realized that the amount I've eaten for 3 plus days with the amount of money that I would have spent on a pizza. But at the same time, I also recognize that the pizza in itself is the best pizza that I could get around here. So it's like, you know what? At the same time, I recognize that that pizza is worth me getting. It's also like you can get so many, you can use money in a way where it's like, wow, I'm happy that this guy has the money. So the way I got myself to detach from money was realizing that money in itself isn't going to change the results of what I feel at the end of the story. I know that if I act on good intention and essentially good vibes, that A, the money's always going to find me, but then B, I'm going to feel just as good having $1 in my bank account than I would if I check right now and someone just send me $10 million. For me, it's that I learned this was that I threw I threw the fact that I was feeling so much despair at 21. I was like, you know what? If I was 90 years old right now, how would my life look? What would I be worrying about anything? How would I get to have all of these things? And what does it feel like being somebody who can take where they are today, put it to the side, and say, okay, ideally, I have put myself in X, Y, and Z position, and these are the feelings associated with these things, like driving a car, for example. Everyone's like, oh, I want this, brand new car, right? Well, but the interesting thing is that the state of wanting something is the same state of having that same thing. Because if you keep wanting something, it's also implying that it's a desire that, in a sense, kind of like it could be on its way, but if you're sitting there saying like, yeah, I accept it, it's in the same sense. It's like you're not using that energy in the sense that, like, yeah, that thing that I want, it has this feeling. I can feel that feeling today, knowing that when when that day comes and I can get the key, look at the car, and I could say, open. The key that I have in my hand is going to open the car. And when I go and I get into that car, I'm going to turn the car on. I'm going to connect my phone to the Bluetooth, and I'm going to listen to essentially the music that today makes me happy, or today that I resonate with the feeling of happiness now and then. And so for me, when I sit here and I see these things, it's like I can essentially pretend that I can do that today, every day, for as long as I want, because that's essentially still true. Because if you go ahead and frame it in the sense of, like, you know what, at the end of the day, if my car takes me from my home to the gas station and I could fill it with gas, that's going to be no different than the car that I'm looking for, which is essentially no different than me then taking the car from the gas station to my job. Literally no difference. Because you still have to push an accelerator, you still have to push on the brake, you still have to move said car from drive into park. So you do all these things, and this is how I essentially, one of the ways that I helped detach myself from money was because the money, I stopped looking at money as a means for associating a particular emotion or feeling or experience, and rather I said, okay, you know, this house you have, August, it's got all of these fruit trees, and it's got a good amount of land that you grow produce on, and that produce is what you feed your family with, and that same produce is maybe some of it you give away because someone maybe has a honey business, and you're like, yeah, you know what, I appreciate you making this honey for us. Like we're gonna pay you, and then we're gonna give you some stuff because we just have so much of it, right? And then again, detaching yourself from money, it's realizing that money, when people know that they're, and this is obviously very subjective of what can be considered right or what is considered worthy. But when you hone it into the bare basics of, yeah, you know what, this money isn't going to change whether I act the same or act any differently. The money's not going to change whether I tip more or I tip less. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe the money isn't going to change the places I shop at or any of these things. I mean, maybe there might be some things that you change, but you're not going to be in the way, the detachment way. You're not going to sit there being like, well, and see, like, that's a fascinating thing because plenty of people have essentially everything that I'm saying. They can do the exact opposite, and it works out for them. And I'm happy for them because really, what's happening there is that the version of what they know to be real and true works for them. It's just I'm seeing these things from the experience that I find myself in this situation, and this is just based off of my own personal experience, realizing that the way I got myself to detach from money was realizing that my version of value is not your version of value. I mean, if it is, great. But typically, it's like that's what makes us human. Is that I see a certain twinkle from this side of the disco ball, and then on that side of the disco ball, you might see a completely different twinkle. And that's the point. Because then when I go and I look at your perspective, it's like, wow, I can either choose to adopt it or not care about it at all. Because there's some things where it's like, oh, you know what? Like bread, for example. I've been trying essentially as many bread places around where I live as possible. And outside of the fact that there's different people making different breads, there's like this cusp where it's like, okay, sourdough. And then once you get into that, then it's like hydration points. And then it's flours. And then it's fermentation time. And all these things and in between. But then there's like bare bars that are like, okay, there's a particular flour and grain that objectively work in such a way where it's like, you know what? I know that I don't have to go anywhere else because these people here, they're doing exactly what is up my alley. But see, the money in itself, it's like you detach yourself from it based off the fact that you resonate with said system, like whatever it is they're doing. Because some people they essentially have all the money in the world for every designer, but they don't flaunt it in the means of like, well, I mean, but they do, and it's like a whole fascinating thing because the only, again, if I'm doing my best to narrow down, like I detach myself from money this way. I just have so many different ways to look at what detachment is that it's very simple because all you really have to focus on is money is not a means to your end, but money in itself is the end. It's the It's it's the thought pattern you have with money. That's what money is. Money isn't a gateway or a bridge or a vice. When I realized that, it was like, okay, money. And really, what happens with money is you start to accept money in the same way that you would, in a sense, accept yourself, with open arms. Because you're not sitting here or sitting there realizing, like, me panicking about money isn't going to change anything or influence anyone, but you're thinking about it. If you have the thought pattern of being somebody who is a penny pincher, then you're going to continuously have experiences where you're a penny pincher. But if you're someone who takes the time to have positive thoughts about money and say, hey, you know what? Here's a few extra bucks. Great. I get to get new tires for my car. I get to leave a big tip at the restaurant I'm going to. I get to take myself on vacation. So then, by having a good association with money, and no one has to believe your association with money, only you do, is part of that journey that you then go on to then start putting yourself with action by action, step by step, into this room. You collect that amount of money. This room, you collect that amount of money, and then maybe along the way, you're like, yeah, you know what? I get to rightfully give some of this energy that I collected to this guy or to these people, knowing that, you know what? These people, they deserve it. Because you know why? Because that path that you're on is because you're on your way to that desire where it's like, yeah, you know what? I get paid to be happy and to sit here in my bed. I'm talking to this microphone, my eyes closed, so that you can listen to this. Great. How about it? And it feels good. And so I can wrap up by saying this. This is the recent one that I learned, was that the detachment of money is also, in the same sense, realizing that you're worthy of having it. Because a lot of what I learned is that my ability to realize that I was worthy of it was also when my self-worth increased, how much I valued what I am and what I offer. And the the best thing that I could do for myself is be the best version of myself so that other people get to experience what that is like. Because think about this. I got a bike in the backyard. It's got two flat wheels. I mean, it's got the brakes. It's got the body. But can that bike be used? Now, see, there's a bike in the garage. Two wheels, two brakes, the body. It works. So realizing that and being somebody who then found out that I was worthy of having the money took me out of the mindset and the thought patterns of how I used to think that money was inherently wrong, or that it was bad, or that people with a lot of money are bad people, or people do bad things with money, and then realizing that everything should be free and all these other things. And it's like, well, you know, as sideways as everything is, it's best if I choose to change the way I think about money, because ultimately that way that I perceive myself as someone who has good thoughts and I'm a good person. So I resonate with things that are on that path of expansion. Why would I want to constrict and restrict and deflect and defer when I can detach from that, and even detach from all things really, and just sit there and say, you know what? When I do move, it's because I'm happy to do so. And so that's when the action starts giving you the energy that you put in. Take care. All the best.